The rain fell in a steady drizzle over the sprawling campus of the Earth Defense Academy, a facility renowned for producing the finest military minds and warriors humanity had to offer. The academy was a fortress of steel and glass, a symbol of Earth's resilience in a galaxy that was anything but kind. This was the place where humanity's best trained to defend their home, a place where discipline, strategy, and unwavering determination were etched into the very foundations. Tonight, however, the usually calm and ordered atmosphere was charged with an unusual tension. A low hum echoed through the sky, growing louder and more distinct as a sleek alien transport ship descended onto the Academy's landing pad. Its hull shimmered with an iridescent sheen, an otherworldly design unlike anything seen on Earth. The few cadets lingering outside stopped and stared, their conversations falling silent as the ship's ramp extended with a hiss. This wasn't the first time an alien had visited Earth. The Galactic Concord, a coalition of advanced species, had established contact with humanity decades ago. Most species viewed humans with mild curiosity, some with skepticism, and a few with outright disdain. But this visit was different. The Concord's decision to send one of their elite soldiers to observe Earth's military training was unprecedented. It wasn't an ambassador or scientist stepping out of the ship, it was a warrior, a figure from a species known across the galaxy for their physical prowess and combat efficiency. The alien soldier emerged, and the cadets held their breath. Towering over the humans, it was clad in a form-fitting exosuit that pulsed faintly with blue energy. Its skin was a deep shade of gray, smooth and unblemished, with eyes that glowed faintly like embers. The alien's every movement exuded precision and power, its presence radiating an aura of superiority that was hard to ignore. This was a Valrak, a species humanity had heard whispers about legends of their strength, their fearlessness in battle, and their cold, calculating nature. Standing at the base of the ramp was General Hayes, the Academy's commanding officer, flanked by a group of senior instructors. Hayes was a man who had seen his share of wars and stared down death more times than he could count. Yet even he felt the weight of this moment. He stepped forward, his posture straight and his voice steady. "Welcome to the Earth Defense Academy. We're honored to host you." The Valrak soldier inclined its head slightly, a gesture that could have been respect or merely acknowledgement. Its voice, when it spoke, was deep and resonant, with a strange metallic edge. "I am Kratek. I have come to observe. Do not disappoint me." The words hung in the air, a challenge that ignited a spark of defiance in the cadets watching from a distance. Among them, a young recruit named Daniel clenched his fists. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest in his class, but he had something to prove. To himself, to his instructors, and now, apparently, to an alien who seemed to think Earth's warriors weren't worth its time. Kratek's arrival disrupted the Academy's usual rhythm. The next morning, the alien stood on the observation platform overlooking the cadets as they ran drills. Its glowing eyes tracked their movements, analyzing every flaw, every hesitation. The instructors barked orders louder than usual, their pride in humanity's potential driving them to push the cadets harder. But it wasn't enough. Kratek's expression remained unreadable, its silence more cutting than any words of criticism could have been. During a hand-to-hand combat session, Kratek finally spoke. "This is your training? It is no wonder your species struggles to survive." Its voice carried across the training grounds, each word a dagger to the cadets' pride. The recruits exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence wavering. Some wanted to argue, to defend themselves, but they knew better than to speak out of turn. The instructors tried to ignore the comment, but it was clear Kratek's presence was getting under their skin too. For years, they had dedicated their lives to molding ordinary men and women into extraordinary warriors. To have their methods dismissed so casually was a bitter pill to swallow. That afternoon, Kratek requested to spar with the cadets. It was supposed to be a demonstration, a chance for the alien to show its advanced techniques. But as soon as it stepped into the ring, the air changed. This wasn't going to be a simple exhibition. Kratek's movements were calculated, its strikes swift and precise. One by one, the cadets fell, unable to match the alien's speed and strength. Even the Academy's top performers struggled to land a single blow. By the time the sparring session ended, the cadets were bruised and battered, their spirits crushed. Kratek stood in the center of the ring, untouched and unimpressed. It looked at General Hayes, its voice cold. The words were a knife to the heart of everyone present. For a moment, it seemed as though Kratek had confirmed humanity's worst fears, that they were inferior, destined to be outmatched by the galaxy's older and more advanced civilizations. But then, something unexpected happened. Daniel, the young recruit who had been silently fuming since the alien's arrival, stepped forward. His body ached from the beating he'd taken earlier, but his eyes burned with determination. "Let me try again," he said, his voice steady. The instructors hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. General Hayes raised a hand, signaling them to wait. He could see something in Daniel's eyes, a spark that hadn't been extinguished despite everything. Kratek tilted its head, almost amused. "You wish to fail a second time?" Daniel stepped into the ring, his heart pounding. "Maybe. But you'll know I didn't quit." The cadets watched in tense silence as Daniel squared off against the alien. He knew he couldn't match Kratek's strength or speed, so he focused on his training, on the strategies his instructors had drilled into him. The sparring began, and while the outcome seemed inevitable, something remarkable unfolded. Daniel didn't win, but he lasted longer than anyone else had. Each time Kratek knocked him down, he got back up, his resolve unshaken. By the end of the match, Daniel was battered but still standing, his chest heaving with exertion. Kratek stared at him, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly. For the first time since its arrival, the alien seemed uncertain. It said nothing as it stepped out of the ring, its expression unreadable. That night, as the cadets sat in the mess hall nursing their injuries, the mood was a strange mix of defeat and defiance. Daniel's stand had lit a spark in them, a reminder of what made humanity unique. They weren't the strongest or the fastest, but they were resilient. They fought, not because they always won, but because giving up wasn't in their nature. In the shadows of the observation deck, Kratek watched the humans, its mind racing. It had come here, expecting to confirm its assumptions about the inferiority of Earth's warriors. Instead, it had seen something it couldn't quite understand. Something that made its glowing eyes dim slightly in contemplation. For the first time, the Valrak soldier felt an unfamiliar sensation, unease. And as the rain began to fall once more, Kratek couldn't shake the feeling that it had underestimated the humans. What it had witnessed today wasn't just a display of stubbornness. It was something deeper, something dangerous. The alien turned away from the window, its thoughts unsettled. Tomorrow would bring more observations, more challenges. But for the first time, Kratek wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't the humans who should be afraid. The next morning, the academy was alive with a sense of restless determination. The cadets, who had been humiliated the day before, woke up earlier than usual, their muscles sore, but their spirits somehow hardened. Kratek's words, cutting and dismissive, had left a mark, but it wasn't just defeat that lingered in their minds. It was the look on the alien's face as Daniel had stood up for the final time. That brief flicker of uncertainty had planted a seed in their collective psyche. Maybe, just maybe, the alien wasn't as invincible as it seemed. Daniel himself was back on the training grounds before dawn, his body protesting every step. Despite the exhaustion, his resolve burned brighter than ever. He replayed the sparring session in his head, every strike, every fall. He hadn't landed a single blow, but he'd seen something in Kratek's movements, small tells, barely perceptible shifts. It wasn't invulnerable. It could be beaten. As the sun rose, Daniel wasn't alone for long. Other cadets joined him, quietly falling into line as they began their drills. No one spoke, but there was a shared understanding. They weren't just training for themselves anymore. They were training for humanity, for the pride of a species that refused to bow. The instructors, watching from a distance, exchanged glances. There was something different in the air today, something they hadn't seen in years. Kratek, meanwhile, stood in the observation tower overlooking the training grounds. It watched the humans with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The alien's mind churned with questions it didn't want to admit were troubling. The humans weren't the fastest. They weren't the strongest. Their tactics were rudimentary compared to the advanced strategies of the Valrak. And yet, there was something it couldn't quantify. It reviewed the footage of the previous day's sparring sessions, pausing on Daniel's final moments in the ring. The young human had been outmatched in every way, yet he had refused to stay down. Kratek had faced countless opponents in its career, from the fiercest warriors to the most cunning strategists, but none had displayed the sheer tenacity of this boy. The alien found itself unsettled by the memory of Daniel's eyes filled not with fear, but with defiance. The Academy's schedule was packed that day, with drills, simulations, and tactical exercises. Kratek moved from one session to the next, observing in silence. The alien's presence was a constant weight on the cadets, pushing them to their limits and beyond. Every stumble, every hesitation was met with the Valrak's cold, critical gaze. Yet for all its scrutiny, Kratek couldn't deny the changes it was seeing. The humans were improving. Not drastically, not in ways that would make them a match for the Valrak in open combat, but in ways that spoke to their resilience. They adapted quickly, learning from their mistakes with a speed that was unsettling. During a strategy session, Kratek listened as the cadets worked through a hypothetical scenario, defending a colony against an overwhelming alien force. Their solutions were unconventional, even reckless by Valrak standards. But there was an underlying brilliance to their thinking. They exploited weaknesses in ways that no Valrak soldier would have considered. It was messy, chaotic, and unpredictable, everything the Valrak abhorred. And yet, it was effective. As the day wore on, Kratek found itself drawn to Daniel. The young recruit wasn't the most skilled or experienced, but there was something about him that the alien couldn't ignore. During a break in training, Kratek approached Daniel, its towering figure casting a long shadow over the human. The other cadets fell silent, their eyes darting nervously between the two. "You lack strength," Kratek said, its voice as cold as ever. "You lack speed, yet you persist." "Why?" Daniel straightened, meeting the alien's glowing eyes without flinching. "Because giving up means we've already lost," he said simply. "We don't quit. Not when it matters." Kratek tilted its head, studying the human. "Stubbornness is not a strategy." "No," Daniel admitted. "But It's a start. For a moment, Kratek said nothing, its unreadable gaze fixed on the young recruit. Then, without another word, it turned and walked away, leaving Daniel and the others to wonder what the alien was thinking. That evening, as the cadets gathered in the mess hall, the conversation inevitably turned to Kratek. The alien's presence had thrown everything they thought they knew about themselves into question. Some were frustrated, others defiant, but all of them were determined to prove they were more than Kratek's dismissive words suggested. One of the older cadets, a woman with a sharp wit and a knack for strategy, spoke up. "You know what it is about us they don't get," she said, her voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "We're unpredictable. They think they've got us figured out, but we're always one step ahead. They can't see it yet, but we've got something they don't." "What's that?" another cadet asked. "Heart," she replied simply. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. They might not have the advanced technology or the raw power of the galaxy's other species, but they had something that couldn't be measured or replicated. And that was worth fighting for. Meanwhile, Kratek stood alone in its quarters. The glow of its eyes dimmed as it reviewed the day's observations. The humans were strange, infuriatingly so. They lacked the discipline and precision of the Valrak, yet there was a raw energy to them that the alien couldn't ignore. For all their flaws, they had a quality that defied logic, a stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Kratek's thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime from the communication panel on the wall. It was a message from the Galactic Concord, a routine check-in to ensure the mission was proceeding as planned. The alien hesitated before responding, its mind still grappling with questions it didn't want to acknowledge. "The humans are inefficient," it reported, its voice steady. "Their methods lack refinement, yet they possess a resilience that is unusual. Further observation is required." The Concord's response was brief and clinical, as expected. Kratek ended the transmission and turned back to the window, staring out at the academy below. The humans were still training, their silhouettes moving against the backdrop of the setting sun. For the first time, Kratek felt something it couldn't quite name, a nagging doubt that refused to be silenced. It had come here, expecting to confirm the humans' inferiority, to reaffirm the Valrak's place at the top of the galaxy's hierarchy. But what if it had been wrong? What if the humans were more dangerous than they appeared? The thought was unsettling, and as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Kratek couldn't shake the feeling that its mission had become far more complicated than it had anticipated. The air in the academy felt heavier as the days passed. Each session was more intense than the last, and the cadets were being pushed beyond what they thought were their limits. Even the instructors, hardened by years of rigorous training, seemed to be operating on edge. Every move, every strategy, every interaction with Kratek was scrutinized. The alien's presence had become a test in itself, one that demanded more than physical endurance or tactical skill. It demanded something deeper, something none of them could quite define. Daniel noticed it first during a combat simulation. It was meant to be a simple exercise, a team of cadets working together to defend a fortified position against an advancing force. Kratek was observing, as always, its piercing gaze taking in every detail. The cadets moved quickly, their coordination improving with every drill. But as the simulated enemy began to close in, something unusual happened. The holographic attackers, a standard program used in countless training exercises, seemed different this time. Faster, more precise. It wasn't long before the cadets were struggling to keep up, their carefully planned defenses falling apart under the relentless assault. Daniel, positioned at the center of the formation, called out commands, his voice hoarse from effort. But no matter how hard they fought, it wasn't enough. When the simulation ended, the cadets were left in stunned silence, panting and covered in sweat. The holographic battlefield faded away, replaced by the cold, sterile walls of the training room. Kratek stepped forward, its expression unreadable. "Your failure was predictable," it said, its voice cutting through the quiet. "You rely too heavily on outdated tactics. Adaptation is the only path to survival." Daniel clenched his fists, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "We're doing the best we can," he shot back, his voice tinged with anger. "Maybe if you actually helped us instead of just watching." The room went still. For a moment, it seemed as if time itself had stopped. The cadets held their breath, waiting for Kratek's response. The alien tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing as it regarded Daniel. "You believe I should lower myself to your level?" Kratek asked, its tone both incredulous and faintly amused. "You misunderstand my purpose here. I am not your ally. I am your reminder of how far you have to climb." Daniel refused to look away. "Maybe we don't need to climb," he said. "Maybe we just need to fight harder." Kratek's gaze lingered on him for a long moment before it turned and walked away. The tension in the room didn't dissipate with its departure. If anything, it grew heavier, settling over the cadets like a storm cloud. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The words he had exchanged with Kratek replayed in his mind, along with the images of their failure in the simulation. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The holographic attackers hadn't just been faster, they'd been smarter, adapting to the cadets' strategies in real time. It was as if the simulation had been designed to ensure their failure. The next morning, Daniel approached the academy's lead instructor, a stern but fair woman who had earned the cadets' respect through years of mentorship. He told her about his concerns, his voice low to avoid drawing attention. "I've been thinking the same thing," she admitted, her expression grim. "But I can't prove anything. If Kratek is manipulating the simulations, it's doing it in a way we can't detect." "Why would it do that?" Daniel asked, his frustration evident. "What's the point of setting us up to fail?" The instructor didn't have an answer, but the question lingered in both their minds. As the day went on, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that Kratek's presence at the academy wasn't just about observing their progress. It was testing them, yes, but it felt like more than that. It felt like it was trying to push them to their breaking point. During a strategy session that afternoon, Daniel noticed something else. Kratek wasn't just watching, it was listening. Every time the cadets discussed a new tactic or approach, the alien's gaze seemed to sharpen, as if it was analyzing their words, storing them away for some unknown purpose. The realization sent a chill down Daniel's spine. By the time the evening's drills began, the cadets were more determined than ever. The simulations were grueling, designed to exploit their weaknesses and force them to think on their feet. But no matter how hard they tried, the challenges seemed insurmountable. It wasn't just the physical toll, it was the psychological strain of knowing that Kratek was always watching, always judging. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the academy grounds, Kratek called for a final exercise. The cadets assembled on the training field, their bodies aching but their spirits unbroken. Kratek stood before them, its towering figure illuminated by the harsh glow of the floodlights. "This will be your ultimate test," it announced, its voice carrying an ominous weight. "A live combat scenario. You will face an enemy force far superior to your own. Victory is unlikely, but survival will suffice." The cadets exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of Kratek's words sinking in. Live combat. This wasn't a simulation. Whatever they were about to face, it was real. And it was dangerous. Daniel stepped forward, his jaw set in determination. "We're ready," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at his insides. Kratek regarded him with a look that was almost approving. Almost. "We shall see," it said. The cadets were given a brief window to prepare, their minds racing as they reviewed their strategies. The instructors offered what guidance they could, but it was clear that this was a test the cadets would have to face on their own. As the countdown began, Daniel felt a strange calm settle over him. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain: they wouldn't go down without a fight. When the signal came, the cadets moved into position, their hearts pounding in unison. The enemy emerged from the shadows, a squad of advanced combat drones, their sleek forms bristling with weaponry. The drones moved with terrifying precision, their every action a calculated display of lethal efficiency. The first engagement was chaos. The cadets fought valiantly, their movements a blend of practiced coordination and desperate improvisation. The drones were relentless, forcing them to adapt on the fly. Daniel found himself at the center of the chaos, shouting commands and rallying his teammates. For every drone they managed to disable, two more seemed to take its place. From the observation tower, Kratek watched in silence, its glowing eyes narrowing as it took in the scene below. The cadets were struggling, but they weren't breaking. Their resilience was maddening, their refusal to yield defying everything the Valrak had come to expect. As the battle raged on, Daniel began to notice patterns in the drone's movements, subtle flaws in their programming that could be exploited. He called out to his teammates, directing them to target specific weak points. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. But just as hope began to take root, the drones adapted. Their movements became faster, more unpredictable, as if responding to the cadets' tactics in real time. It was then that Daniel realized the truth: Kratek was controlling them. The alien wasn't just observing, it was orchestrating the entire scenario, testing the cadets in ways they hadn't anticipated. The realization sent a surge of adrenaline through Daniel's veins. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a battle for something much bigger. For humanity's pride. For their place in the galaxy. And as the drones closed in, Daniel knew they couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not ever. The drones' movements became unnervingly synchronized, almost as if they were an extension of a single mind. Their adaptability wasn't just advanced, it was unnaturally precise. Daniel's heart raced as he realized they weren't fighting machines. They were facing a reflection of Kratek itself. The alien wasn't just testing them from the sidelines. It was actively manipulating the battlefield, countering their every move in real time. This wasn't a drill, nor was it merely a test of skill. This was a game of control, and Kratek held all the cards. The cadets' desperation began to show. They had worked together through countless challenges, but this was unlike anything they had faced. The air was thick with tension as another barrage from the drones sent two of their team sprawling. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to retreat, to regroup, but there was nowhere to run. Every avenue of escape was blocked, and the drones closed in with unrelenting precision. As the fighting intensified, a sudden flash of light erupted from the far side of the field. For a moment, everyone froze, both cadets and drones caught off guard by the unexpected interruption. Emerging from the shadows, a figure strode forward, tall and unmistakably human. It was one of the Academy's senior commanders, a man known for his tactical brilliance and unyielding discipline. His presence was a shock to everyone, especially Kratek, whose gaze snapped toward the intruder. "Stand down," the commander bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. The drones hesitated, their movements faltering for the first time. The cadets, battered and exhausted, looked to the commander with a mix of relief and confusion. But Daniel noticed something strange in the way the man carried himself. His expression was tight, almost wary, as if he knew something the rest of them didn't. Kratek didn't move. Its glowing eyes narrowed, and for the first time there was a flicker of something that resembled unease. "You interfere at your own peril," it said, its voice low and dangerous. The commander ignored the warning. He turned to the cadets, his tone urgent. "Fall back to the perimeter," he ordered. "Now." Daniel hesitated, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right, but the commander's authority left little room for argument. With a quick nod, he motioned for the others to retreat. The cadets moved as quickly as they could, dragging the injured with them. Daniel stayed at the rear, his eyes darting between the commander and Kratek. "What's going on?" Daniel asked, his voice low but firm. The commander didn't answer. Instead, he reached for a device clipped to his belt, a small, unassuming piece of tech that Daniel had never seen before. When the commander activated it, a low hum filled the air, and the drones froze in place. Kratek's head snapped toward the device, its expression shifting to one of barely concealed fury. "You overstep," Kratek said, its voice colder than Daniel had ever heard. The commander didn't flinch. "Your tests are over," he said. "These cadets are not your pawns." For a moment, the tension in the air was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Kratek's towering frame seemed to ripple with restrained energy, and Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the alien was moments away from unleashing something catastrophic. But then Kratek did something unexpected. It laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down Daniel's spine. "You think you've won?" Kratek said, its voice dripping with disdain. "You still don't understand. This isn't about them. It's about you." Before anyone could react, Kratek raised one of its elongated arms. A pulse of energy shot out, striking the commander's device and shattering it in an instant. The drones reactivated, their movements more aggressive than ever, but they didn't target the cadets this time. Instead, they turned on the commander, forcing him to dive for cover. Chaos erupted once more. Daniel shouted for the cadets to hold their ground, but it was clear they were outmatched. The drones weren't just attacking. They were coordinating with a level of precision that bordered on terrifying. Kratek watched from the sidelines, its expression unreadable, as if this entire scenario was nothing more than an elaborate game. But then, just as it seemed all hope was lost, something unexpected happened. One of the cadets, a quiet, unassuming recruit who had barely spoken during their time at the academy, stepped forward. She held a small device in her hands, something she had been working on during their downtime, though no one had paid much attention to it before. "This might be a long shot," she said, her voice trembling, "but I think I can disrupt their connection." Daniel glanced at her, his mind racing. "Do it," he said, without hesitation. The cadet knelt down, her fingers moving quickly over the device. The air seemed to hum with anticipation as she worked, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The other cadets formed a protective circle around her, their weapons ready as the drones closed in. Kratek's eyes narrowed, its attention shifting to the cadet. "Futile," it muttered, its voice barely audible over the chaos. But the cadet didn't stop. With one final adjustment, she activated the device. A high-pitched tone filled the air, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The drones staggered, their movements jerky and disjointed, as if something was interfering with their programming. Kratek's expression shifted, a flicker of something almost human crossing its features. "Impossible," it murmured, its voice tinged with disbelief. The cadets seized the opportunity. With renewed determination, they launched a counterattack, focusing on disabling the drones while they were vulnerable. Daniel led the charge, his mind racing with a mix of fear and adrenaline. For the first time, it felt like they had a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. But even as the cadets fought, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Kratek wasn't just an observer or a teacher. It was something else entirely, and whatever its true purpose was, it had yet to reveal its hand. The battlefield was a chaotic mess of sparks, shattered metal, and strained breaths. The cadets had pushed themselves beyond their limits, fighting with every ounce of skill and determination they had. The makeshift device the quiet cadet had activated continued to emit its interference signal, keeping the drones disoriented, but it was clear the reprieve wouldn't last. The hum of Kratek's power grew louder, and Daniel could feel it reverberating in his chest like a drumbeat, steady and unrelenting. Kratek stepped forward, its towering frame radiating a sense of control that sent a chill through everyone. "You fight well for being so young," it said, its voice calm but with an edge of something darker. "But you've missed the point of all of this." Its glowing eyes swept over the cadets, then shifted to Daniel, locking onto him with a piercing intensity. "This isn't about survival. It's about understanding." Daniel clenched his fists, his body tense with frustration and fear. "Understanding what?" he shouted, his voice hoarse. "That we're expendable? That we're just pieces in your game?" Kratek tilted its head, the faintest hint of amusement crossing its expression. "No," it replied. "That your kind, for all its chaos, is more dangerous than even you realize." Before anyone could process the cryptic words, Kratek raised its arms, and the battlefield seemed to tremble. The remaining drones froze in place, their lights flickering as if something had overtaken them. Then, in a single synchronized motion, they turned, not toward the cadets, but toward Kratek itself. For a split second, there was stunned silence, broken only by the low hum of the interference device. "What's happening?" one of the cadets whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel's mind raced, trying to make sense of the shift. Kratek stood unmoving, its gaze fixed on the drones as if it had expected this all along. The air around it shimmered with a faint energy field, and Daniel realized with dawning horror that the alien wasn't just in control of the drones, it had become their target. Kratek's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You've proven yourselves capable of adaptation," it said, its tone eerily calm. "But adaptation comes at a cost." Without warning, the drones surged forward, their movements faster and more coordinated than before. Kratek didn't flinch. Instead, it unleashed a wave of energy that stopped the first line of drones mid-charge, disintegrating them into glowing fragments. The cadets watched in stunned silence, caught between awe and terror. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was something far beyond their comprehension. Daniel took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to retreat, but something held him in place. There was a strange look in Kratek's eyes now, not anger, but something almost resigned. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This was all part of Kratek's plan. The alien had engineered this moment, not as a test of their strength, but as a demonstration of something far more profound. The quiet cadet, still holding her interference device, seemed to reach the same conclusion. "It's sacrificing itself," she said, her voice barely audible. Why would it do that? Daniel didn't have an answer. All he knew was that they had to act, and fast. The drones were relentless, and despite Kratek's immense power, it was clear the alien couldn't hold them off forever. The energy field around it flickered, and Daniel could see the strain in its movements. Whatever Kratek was trying to prove, it was pushing itself to the limit to do so. Suddenly, the commander's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. This isn't over yet. He emerged from the shadows, his uniform scorched but his determination unshaken. In his hands was another device, larger and more complex than the one the cadet had used. He activated it, and a pulse of energy rippled through the battlefield, causing the drones to stagger once more. Kratek turned to the commander, its expression unreadable. You still interfere, it said, but there was no anger in its tone. If anything, it sounded impressed. The commander ignored the remark, his focus entirely on the drones. You want to test us? He said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Then let us show you what we're capable of. With the drones momentarily disabled, the cadets regrouped, their exhaustion replaced by a newfound determination. Daniel stepped forward, meeting Kratek's gaze head-on. We're not just fighting for survival, he said, his voice firm. We're fighting for each other. That's what makes us human. For the first time, Kratek seemed to falter. The glow in its eyes dimmed slightly, and there was a flicker of something almost human in its expression. Perhaps, it said, its voice softer now. But humanity's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. You fight for connection, for unity, but that same drive can lead to destruction. As the words sank in, the drones reactivated, their movements more erratic than before. The commander's device had bought them time, but it was clear the interference wouldn't last. The cadets braced themselves for the final assault, their weapons raised and their determination unshaken. But then, in a move that shocked everyone, Kratek stepped forward, placing itself between the cadets and the drones. Enough, it said, its voice echoing with a power that sent shivers down Daniel's spine. You've proven what I needed to see. With a wave of its hand, Kratek unleashed a final pulse of energy, one so intense that it knocked everyone to the ground. When Daniel looked up, the drones were gone, reduced to nothing but fragments scattered across the battlefield. Kratek stood at the center of the devastation, its frame glowing faintly as if it had expended the last of its strength. The cadets stared in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. Kratek turned to them, its movement slower now, as if it were carrying an immense weight. You have the potential to rise above your nature, it said, its voice tinged with something almost like hope. But that choice is yours to make. Before anyone could respond, Kratek's form began to fade, its glowing eyes dimming as it slowly dissolved into the air. The last thing Daniel saw was the faintest hint of a smile, a gesture so human that it left him speechless. As the battlefield fell silent, the commander stepped forward, his expression grave. This wasn't just a test, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of realization. It was a warning. Daniel looked at the fragments scattered around them, his mind racing with questions that had no answers. Whatever Kratek had been, whatever its true purpose was, it had left them with a choice. And as he stood there, surrounded by his fellow cadets, he knew one thing for certain: their lives would never be the same. The silence that followed Kratek's departure hung heavy in the air. The cadets stood motionless, staring at the place where the alien had vanished, its final words echoing in their minds. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on everyone, leaving an emptiness that no one seemed ready to fill. Daniel turned to the commander, hoping for some kind of guidance, but the older man looked just as lost as the rest of them. The commander's usual air of authority had been replaced by something unfamiliar doubt. Slowly, the cadets began to lower their weapons, the adrenaline in their systems fading to exhaustion. The battlefield around them, once chaotic and alive with action. The remnants of the drones were scattered everywhere, their sleek, once intimidating forms now reduced to lifeless scraps. The interference device had powered down, its energy spent, and the strange hum that had filled the air was gone. All that remained was the faint sound of the wind carrying the acrid smell of burnt metal. Daniel felt a wave of conflicting emotions, relief, confusion, even sadness. He looked at the fragments of the drones, and then at his fellow cadets, their faces pale and drawn. They had survived, but the victory didn't feel like one. Kratek's words had planted seeds of doubt, and the message it had left behind weighed heavily on all of them. For all the aliens' immense power and inscrutability, its final act had been one of mercy. It had chosen not to destroy them, even when it clearly could have. The question gnawed at Daniel. Why? The commander finally broke the silence, his voice quiet but firm. "We need to regroup," he said. "There's a lot we don't understand, but standing here won't give us answers. Move out." The cadets obeyed, their movements sluggish but orderly. As they made their way back toward the academy, the reality of what they had been through began to sink in. They had faced an alien being of unimaginable power, and somehow they had lived to tell the tale. But the encounter had left more questions than answers, and the cadets couldn't shake the feeling that they had been part of something much bigger than themselves. Back at the academy, the mood was somber. The instructors and support staff, who had watched the battle unfold from a distance, were waiting for them, their faces etched with concern. The cadets debriefed in hushed tones, recounting every detail of the encounter with Kratek. The quiet cadet, who had activated the interference device, explained her actions, and the others listened with a mix of admiration and curiosity. Her quick thinking had bought them precious time, and everyone agreed that it had likely saved their lives. The commander addressed the group later that evening, his expression grave. "What happened today was unprecedented," he said. "We were tested in ways we couldn't have anticipated, and we've learned a lot not just about ourselves, but about the challenges we might face in the future." Kratek was a reminder that humanity is not alone in this universe, and that our strength lies in our unity, our resilience, and our ability to adapt. His words were met with a heavy silence. The cadets understood the gravity of what he was saying, but the wounds, both physical and emotional, were still too fresh for them to fully process the implications. The commander dismissed them with a final directive: rest, reflect, and prepare for whatever might come next. Over the next few days, life at the academy began to return to a semblance of normalcy, but the experience had changed everyone. The cadets were more focused, more driven, and more aware of the larger picture. The petty rivalries and trivial concerns that had once seemed so important now felt insignificant in the face of what they had been through. They trained harder, pushed themselves further, and supported each other in ways they hadn't before. The bonds they had forged in the heat of battle became unshakable, and the sense of camaraderie among them grew stronger with each passing day. Daniel, however, couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to Kratek's message. The alien's words haunted him, and he found himself replaying the encounter in his mind, searching for clues. He spent hours poring over the data from the battle, trying to piece together a clearer picture of what had happened. The commander had given him access to the Academy's archives, hoping that the information might provide some answers, but Daniel's search only led to more questions. One night, unable to sleep, Daniel found himself wandering the halls of the academy. He ended up in the observation deck, a quiet space with a panoramic view of the night sky. The stars stretched out before him, endless and unknowable, and he felt a deep sense of awe and insignificance. For all their training and preparation, for all their technology and ingenuity, humanity was still just a small part of a much larger universe. The realization was both humbling and inspiring. As he stood there, lost in thought, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see the quiet cadet, the one who had activated the interference device, approaching. "Do you think we'll ever really understand what happened?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think that's part of the lesson. We're not meant to have all the answers. We just have to keep pushing forward, keep trying to be better." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Kratek said, we have the potential to rise above our nature," she said. "Maybe that's what this was all about, showing us what we're capable of, and challenging us to live up to that potential." Daniel considered her words, and for the first time since the battle, he felt a sense of clarity. Kratek's actions had been deliberate, calculated, and deeply symbolic. The alien had seen something in humanity worth preserving, worth nurturing, and it had chosen to leave them with a message of hope rather than destruction. The implications were profound, and Daniel realized that the true test wasn't over. It had just begun. In the weeks and months that followed, the academy became a hub of activity. The incident with Kratek sparked a flurry of research, debate, and preparation. The cadets and their instructors worked tirelessly to improve their strategies, develop new technologies, and deepen their understanding of the universe. They knew that the encounter had been a wake-up call, and they were determined to rise to the challenge. Daniel and the other cadets continued to train, their resolve stronger than ever. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew that they were part of something much bigger than themselves. They were not just soldiers, they were the future of humanity, and they carried the weight of that responsibility with pride. As for Kratek, its true motives remained a mystery, but its message had left an indelible mark. The cadets carried its words with them, a reminder of their potential and their purpose. And as they looked to the stars, they knew that the story wasn't over. It was only the beginning.